Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the September 23rd, 2014 edition of the Free Thought Forum, brought to you by the friendly folks at Pennsylvania Nonbelievers, Inc. We are the largest group of atheists, agnostics, humanists, and freethinkers in central Pennsylvania. Among many other subjects on this show, we will try to point out the inherent dangers of mixing church and state and the necessity of complete separation. I am Doug Diggens, your host for tonight, and say hello, Jacob. This is Jacob, the co-host. So, anyway, we had a couple technical difficulties. Well, actually, it wasn't a technical difficulty. I've mislaid the thumb drive where I had some photographs that I wanted to present. But
we call them technical difficulties.
Yes, we call them technical.
Not our screw-ups, they're technical difficulties. It's so much easier to say that, I know.
Yes, and plus there's no finger pointing. For the next few episodes of the show, we'll have a segment illustrating how the subject of philosophy from ancient to modern day has changed over time and basically affected everyone's life to some varying degree, from kindergarten to a retirement home, and in some form or another molded the way we think and solve problems in our lives. This was an idea presented by Jacob, and I thought, boy, this is a great idea for a show. I mean, it sounds very highfalutin and everything, and if you've studied philosophy, in college, you'll probably get the feeling of déjà vu. That's moo. That's when you get the feeling that you've heard all this bull before. But, okay, that's a bad joke. But anyway, we'll attempt to keep it lighthearted, informative, and simple in order to prevent our viewers from suffering fatal brain freezes that are normally associated.
As I said in a previous show, I think that's one thing that science does very well in their writings, is being able to keep it lighthearted to the inaccessible to layperson. Something that philosophers haven't been the best about doing.
No, and unfortunately, it turns some people off. You know, they hear the word philosophy and they go, oh boy, I start to yawn already. Oh,
and I can hardly blame them, because there's a few books of philosophy where I trudge through about 75% of it going, give me something interesting, please.
Yeah, and in the meantime, you're sort of nodding off.
But sometimes I think that other 25% can be very worth the going through the rest of it.
Well, because it's so doggone informative. Yeah. It really is. News bulletin. Okay, this past Sunday, the 21st of September, in the year of your Lord, 2014, PA Nonbelievers participated in the Adams County Heritage Festival held in the Gettysburg Recreational Park. Now, this was our first time at this event, and I must say that we were very warmly greeted by both the festival committee and everyone attending. Seeing so many smiling faces was truly heartwarming. And didn't you talk to some clergy that was also?
I think that there were a couple of Catholics running around, but I don't think I talked to them personally. But they seemed friendly enough. They weren't there to try to argue with us, and there were definitely a lot of people coming up, interested in starting a meetup in Adams County, which is something we've been trying to do.
Yeah, well, why don't you mention that right now before I go on?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead with reminders here. Well, one thing I wanted to say was, one thing that was sort of funny when people were coming up and saying, oh, wow, you guys here in Adams County, and how's it been going? And we've been telling them it's going great. And then we tell them, oh, by the way, we're going up to Perry County October 4th. And I saw a lot of snickers on people's faces because I think we're not going to get that same reception when we go up to Newport, the Newport Canal Day, which is on October 4th, as I said. It's a Saturday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And we also have the Pennsboro Pumpkin Fest, which is also one of our more interesting events we go to.
You really have to go to the Pumpkin Fest.
It's a 2-day event, both Saturday and Sunday, the 11th and 12th. We also will be holding a protest in Bedford, Pennsylvania. This is in protesting to a photo a teenager posted where they were making an obscene gesture with a statue of Jesus, and now he's facing charges for it, which we really feel amount to sort of blasphemy laws, and the way the law is stated is just overreaching, and I don't think it's really appropriate to be charged for someone to be facing possibly 2 years in juvenile detention for what he did.
Yeah, and the thing is that the church does not want to press charges,
right.
but it's the assistant district attorney or the prosecutor that decides wants to push this through. I mean, what the heck? He's a 14-year-old kid, and. You know, I saw it, I thought, you know, this is incredibly bad taste.
Right.
But I laughed my butt off when I saw it.
Well, I should say this isn't by no means condoning what he did. I want to make that clear. We don't say we all approve of what he did. No, that's not the point. The point is, you know, we still think he shouldn't be facing the punishment he does for that kind of behavior. And well, I would also say as a side point, it's worth noting that there's a couple years ago, a big story was a female punk band in Russia who went into a church and caused a big disturbance. And there was a lot of backlash because they were put in jail for 2 years for what I think was, you know, maybe also an overcharge, but they caused a genuine disturbance where this guy was just posting a bad taste photo. So it's just something to put it in the perspective. But in terms of our upcoming meetups, we have Lancaster coming up. Oh, by the way, before I move on, you can find all the information about the protest on our website, panonbelievers.org. But our next meetup is in Lancaster on the 24th. The York meeting is canceled due to a conflict with the Newport Canal Day. A lot of people wanted to come up and participate in the booth, and so that's what we're going to do. We'll see you in November for that. Lebanon's on the 8th, Harrisburg's on the 9th, we have Chambersburg on the 21st, and we'll also have the Perry County meetup, which we're still trying to get going and get moving on the 16th at 6:30. And our next show will also be on the 14th of October. So hope to see you then, and now on with the rest of the show.
Oh, thank you very much, Jacob. If you're familiar with our organization, since the year about 2000, we've been participating in many of the area fairs and festivals. This past Sunday was our first, I should say, the very first was the Ye Olde York Fair that was held here in York every year on Mother's Day, Sunday. Now, of course, here in Pennsylvania, we met with a lot of resistance. For some reason, some towns and their organizing committee viewed our organization as persona non grata and tried to prevent us from getting a permit and setting up our information booths. And, you know, that's all that we have. We don't get out there on the sidewalk and start preaching like a lot of the churches and people do. But anyway, they didn't want us anywhere within 5 miles of a good and a moral Christian. But we persevered, and it didn't take long to illustrate by our words and actions that we were no different from them, the Christians, except that we believed in one less God than them. It is sometimes funny, the misconceptions many people have about non-believers, but then that is what we're here for, to correct misinformation they have heard on the street corners and in the churches.
Yeah, especially in churches.
Oh, yeah.
And I think what most people get surprised about is the majority of non-believers in this in this country were once believers themselves. And
Yeah.
actually, almost everybody, almost every activist in the movement, the major activists, were former believers, and sometimes for decades on end. I think David Silverman's the only exception to
Yeah.
that rule, and Anna Laura Gaylor is another exception. But you look at some of the more outspoken people, they were all former believers.
Yeah. Yeah. What is also surprising at these events is the number of people that come up to our information booths and welcome us because they thought that they were the only ones in the area that did not accept the common scriptural account of everything. They were genuinely happy to see us. We are, of course, a shelter from the daily storms of religious rhetoric coming to us or coming at them from all directions. So anyway, for our first tidbit of international news that does not involve shooting drones or the threats of terrorism, listen to this story. Jim, get ready to put up the Moscow Pico photos, if you would. Okay. Jim? Okay, advocates for the tribal people in Peru published these new photos this week that shows a troubling scene. An apparent missionary and other outsiders in a tourist boat idling along the bank of a river to give clothes and other gifts to children from an isolated indigenous tribe. Now, although their actions might seem benign, it can easily transmit diseases to the so-called uncontacted tribes, such as the Moscow Pico people in these photos, who have lived in voluntary isolation in Peru's Madre de Dios region of the Amazon. Quote, it says, "We've been trying to prevent this exact situation from happening," says Rebecca Spooner, a Peru campaigner for Survival International, which advocates for tribal people's rights. Earlier this month, Spooner told Live Science that her organization had been receiving more and more emails from tourists who had encounters with the Moscow Pico people during their trips to the Amazon. At the same time, Survival International colleagues at FENAMAD in Peru issued a statement calling for a ban on tourists filming and photographing people from the tribe and leaving items like clothing on the riverbanks. FENMAD stands for Native Federation of the Madre de Dios River and Tributaries. In a way, it kind of reminds you of, maybe unintentionally, what the early U.S. Army, the cavalry, and everything did to the ancient Indians, the Native Americans of this country. Except, of course, that they did it on purpose. That they distributed, blankets with smallpox, trying to cut down on the population. You had a comment.
Yeah, and I think some of this is we can sit here and debate, how to handle contact with tribes who've never been contacted by the outside, because you have to understand that. I think in this globalized society, sometimes it seems inevitable that we will come into contact with them eventually, but these are discussions to be made rationally with, through debate, through, a more scientific approach. Whereas, that's the problem with where missionaries will just basically short circuit all of that and just go out there without really considering any potential ramifications. It's just, oh, we've got to get these people saved, but without really considering any of the possible consequences that normally is why this kind of thing takes a long time to make contact.
Yeah. Well, I guess that these missionary people are like the Jehovah's Witnesses of the Congo and the Amazon. Even if contact with them could kill off the tribe, they are going to tell you about loving Jesus and the torment of hell. It's like it's killing them softly with kindness.
One thing I just thought about too is another problem you have is sometimes the diseases go the other way.
Yeah.
And that has happened, especially in some of the more fundamentalist churches in this country, which are anti-vaccine. They've actually caused some, I think it was there was a few measles outbreaks in this country from a missionary going over to see where they aren't vaccinated, and they weren't vaccinated either, and they brought it back here and spread it to their church who also wasn't vaccinated. So that's the problem that some of these trips cause, that you have to, that's why, every time we send a doctor or somebody over there, they make sure all their shots are up to date to make sure they're not spreading anything or they're not bringing anything back. And if a lot of times missionaries just don't do that, and that can be a major problem for really both people.
Yeah, I mean, to carry it maybe a little bit further to an extreme, although not really so.
I'm telling you things that have actually happened.
No, but what I'm saying to you is that in the past space programs that they've had, when they sent the first, missile to the moon, the sterilization and everything that they went through on the vehicles, because they wanted to make sure that there was absolutely no earthly contamination that could possibly hurt the moon, and they're doing the same thing.
And when they came back, they quarantined all the astronauts for a while.
Yeah. Because, like you say, it could work in reverse and come back and bite us in the butt.
And that's one of the issues there kind of worries me about global warming, is these melting ice caps have sometimes frozen diseases within the ice layers.
Yeah.
And you don't know what we might get exposed to again. We haven't seen in a long time.
Well, I mean, there's an enormous amount of atmosphere from ancient times that is still trapped in the ice, along
that's what I was
with
saying.
microbes and who knows what else. So,
microbial life is incredibly durable.
Yeah, I mean, it's so robust that
it can survive in the vacuum of outer space.
Yeah,
it really can. I mean, there are living organisms that have survived, not just with no oxygen, but also in the radiation that comes with it.
Just sort of a little bit humorous story. When I was very young, I was early teenage years. My parents moved from one place to another, and what we decided to do was bring my goldfish with us. And what my father did was he put it in the trunk of the car, and it was in the dead of winter. And it took us many hours to get there, but the goldfish bowl froze solid. Okay,
wow.
and I'm going, you killed my goldfish. Well, fortunately, it didn't break the goldfish jar like that. But when the thing thawed out, the goldfish was still alive, and it started swimming away. So it just goes to show you, how robust everything is. Life wants to live. I mean,
we're relatively fragile.
Yeah, as compared.
Right.
Did you want to do the thing that you sent the photos?
Does he have them loaded?
Yes,
All right.
the crocoduck.
Yeah, one of the major finds that they've been recently published in science magazines is a recent discovery of a fossil. It was an ancient dinosaur. They found fragments of it before, but they finally found one more that was more or less intact, or it just found enough pieces to reconstruct what it was. And it's considered to be one of the first aquatic. It seems to be one of the more first aquatic dinosaurs. It had if Jim, you could show the picture. It had a flat crocodile-like head, but its feet you can kind of see are actually a bit duck-like. It's possible that they actually might have had webbed feet for swimming. So it's almost like a half crocodile, half duck. Which, if any of you can remember, Kirk Cameron would constantly demand to see something like that in order to prove evolution. But yeah, and this has kind of been, we've all made jokes about it, like, oh, what if we actually find it? Well, actually, they sort of did.
Yeah.
Now, I should say, like, to clarify a couple of, it's kind of funny to talk about because we're like, well, what do you think now, Kirk Cameron? We actually found it. Now, I should say, this is probably not an ancestor of either a crocodile or a duck. But what it is what they show is a kind of convergent evolution. And what that means is convergent evolution is kind of things we see over and over again in nature because it provides a benefit for many different animals in different circumstances. One example is wings. We see it on at least one mammal. Then you have it on birds, and then there were pterodactyls, which were...
And then went from fins to webbed feet.
Right, right. And then you can... There's a lot of different things that we'll see over and over again. For example, like the flat heads you saw there. Many aquatic animals, especially those that live in shallow water, have flat heads because it's an advantage no matter what you are.
And the eyes were more or less on the top
Right.
of the head, so they could actually peer out of the water.
Right. So it's not like a crocodile duck hybrid, and that's part of the problem. Is a lot of time when creationists say, "Well, show us this," and I'm like, that's just hybridizing two animals. That's not looking for a common ancestor that really has only the common features. That could be ancestral to both, and that's. But it is sort of a silly example because there have been a couple times this has happened. For example, they used to make fun of, well, what would a whale look like as it was evolving for life in the sea, and they'd make all sorts of silly, cartoons of a walking whale, and those disappeared the second they actually found one.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing in this. Once they found it, they knew where to look for more of them. In paleontology, that's one of the biggest, I think one of the hardest parts is trying to figure out just where to dig.
Yeah, well, all these people that are creationists, say, well, why don't you just go out and dig up a skeleton there, some fossil, and prove your point? Well, do you honestly think that people wouldn't? If they could, but it's like if you're looking down from space, okay, at the Earth, and you say, well, okay, we're going to pick out one human being, or we're going to find a human being. There's so much land that's there. How do you know that right at that particular spot, at that location, that you're going to find a fossilized remains?
Right, and the process of fossilization is somewhat precise. That's why we don't get every animal. But what I would compare it to is, let's say you have a video camera of a crime in progress, but you only get a few frames here and there. And that's kind of what we get. We only get a fossil here, and maybe here. But we can still infer what happened in between those points as long as the laws of nature don't stand on their head overnight.
Yeah, very true. But still, as scientists, we're becoming better and better and more adept at finding these fossils. We have seen what is necessary in the strata of the Earth, the makeup of the Earth, and we now know far better than we did, say, 100 years ago, where to look for fossils. And they're not doing it so willy-nilly now. You sort of go out and you walk through. Well, for instance, if you go up Route 222 and you sort of head north, you can see where they have expanded the road out, and especially if you're heading up to State College,
right.
and they've cut out a swath of rock to put the road, and it's beautiful strata. You go up there and you look, and you can see trilobites and everything else in the thing. The only trouble is that when you stop, like I did, cop will tell you to just don't stop, keep moving, don't park your car on the side of the road.
But actually that's one of the things paleontologists do is try to find places where the rock beds are already exposed so they don't even have to dig.
Yeah, because those are places where roads have been actually exposed through the bedrock. They use explosives and take off whole sections of rock, and now it leaves a beautiful rock face, so they can see all the strata going down. Like you say, if you had to do that, like basically in the old days with picks and shovels, you'd be there forever trying to dig up a fossil.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I think that's all we have to say on that subject.
Yeah. So anyway, we had intended to do a show, do segments of shows on philosophy. Was it last week or the last show before that? We did sort of like an introduction to philosophy, and sort of illustrated some of the high points. And now for the next few shows, we're going to present a little bit more of an in-depth study of it. We're, going to also take a look at basic logic and deductive and inductive reasoning as well. Since you started the thing originally, would you like to just continue on?
Did you have something prepared?
No.
Okay, I thought you did. Well,
I said I wasn't sure that you were actually going to make it tonight, and I didn't want to.
Yeah, we apologize. We're a little off sync tonight because I actually got here late. I had other engagements earlier in the evening. I almost didn't make it in time. But I think one of the things we're talking about is it's important to know philosophy because there are a lot of people who misuse it or perhaps don't even understand it well enough, but they pretend like they do. One of the things that I could say is that I noticed during the debate between Matt Delahunty and Cy ten Bruggencate is Cy ten Bruggencate didn't actually understand what the difference between a deductive and an inductive argument was. For example, he tried to ask Matt, well, if you had 100 doors that were blue, what do you think the next one was? And that's what's known as making induction, which is, to say, well, based on, well, actually I should say, the way Saita and Bergenkate presented it, he wanted Matt to say, well, the next one will be blue. But that's not actually how induction works. Well, I should say, inductions don't actually make absolute claims. They say, based on the past information, and what is the most likely case, which is not making an absolute case. You're making a statement about probability. And that's the problem that most people don't understand about inductive reasoning, is when you're extrapolating and trying to make a prediction, you can at best say this is the most likely thing, this is the most probable answer. But it's not making an absolute, yes, this is the case, and there's nothing that's going to change that. On the other hand, you have deductive reasoning, which is when you establish premises and you draw a conclusion from those premises, and there you are making an assertion of fact. And I had a photo of just a basic deductive argument. There's several different forms of it.
That's on, I believe we put that on the end, Jim, that if then, just the writing.
But it's the basic, if we can get up here, it's a basic structured argument. Now, most people don't actually use structured arguments. You'll see them in professional debates from time to time, but for just talking back and forth, usually you don't see a formally structured argument. But it's still important to know how they work, because once you start to understand how an argument is structured, it helps you identify what premises are. And it's the identification of premises that, which is what allows you to really freely dissect their argument and find out, well, is this a sound argument? Mm-hmm. And that's one thing also that there's a distinguishment between is validity and soundness.
Yep.
Which is, I think, an important distinction to make. Validity, when we talk about an argument being valid, it just means that it's structured correctly. You can learn more about this in you can probably Google this and find all the different structures of arguments. But if it just follows the structure it's supposed to be in, then it's a valid argument. But if valid is really only part of the issue. For an argument to really be worth consideration, it has to be sound, and that means a couple more things.
Okay, Jim, would you put up the that one that I put at the end, that picture, just the words, the if then. Yeah. Yeah.
This is an example of a basic structured argument where you say if A are B and all B are C, the first two lines are premises, and then the final line is a conclusion. And if you have like a structure like this, and you whatever you insert for A, B, or C, no matter what they are, it's still a valid argument because it follows the proper structure. But then again, it's possible to have an unsound argument because either your premises are not demonstrated or the conclusion doesn't actually flow from the premises. Now, for an example of a premise not being true, or at least unsubstantiated, is, for example, William Lane Craig, when he uses the moral argument, when he formally states it, his first premise is, if a God exists, then objective morality exists. But there's no way to really demonstrate that claim, nor say for certain that if a God does exist, that he must necessarily care about objective morality or morality in general. You can conceptualize all sorts of different possible gods existing that have nothing to do with morality. So this is a case of it's an unsound argument because a premise isn't demonstrated. You can also get into a premise not logically flowing from the conclusion not logically flowing from the premises. An example of this is actually later in his moral argument. he says that because objective morality exists, therefore a God exists. But you could possibly also conceptualize that objective morality could come from a different source. To put it more simply, a more simple example is you could say that vegetarians don't eat pork, but if somebody doesn't eat pork, that doesn't make them a vegetarian, because you could have other reasons for not eating pork, and you could eat beef and not pork, and you wouldn't be considered a vegetarian. That's an example of where there's many. If there's multiple ways to get to a conclusion, that's when we say it doesn't logically flow.
One that I still remember, hope correctly, and that was, it says, God is love. Love is blind. Ray Charles is blind.
Right.
Therefore, Ray Charles must be God.
Right.
And
Nice. Yeah, well, I mean, that's an example of, it follows a structure. It has there are individual premises within it that can be demonstrated, but then there are sometimes you get into twisting of words, like saying God is love. Well, then you start to get into a variety of fallacies, like first and foremost an equivocation fallacy, which is, well, because two things share a common bond, that means they must be equal in everything that they do.
And that isn't
Right.
usually the case.
Yeah, it's an overgeneralization. That's jumping straight to straight from, like, you sometimes you get a very minor point, and then they want to, once they have the foot in the door, they want to blow it up to mean encompass everything in a huge umbrella term.
Yeah. Just to take a little clip from House, MD, the TV show. He was talking to a little girl that was talking in syllogisms, which is the basic logic example. And his Dr. House said to her that words have set meanings for a reason. If you see an animal like Bill and you try to play fetch, Bill is going to eat you because Bill is a bear. But the little girl says, but Bill has fur, 4 legs and a collar. He's a dog. And House says, you see, that is what is called a faulty syllogism. Just because you call Bill a dog doesn't mean that he is a dog. And he will eat you. And that's what you have to really look at, is the validity of these arguments.
Right. And not, or validity and soundness. Well, actually, in order for an argument to be sound, it has to be it has to be a valid argument. And again, I'd like to say, like, as I said before, I'll just repeat it here because I think it's an important point to note, is even though I found dissecting arguments to be helpful personally, because it helps me really think about all the different pieces of an argument. And if you don't understand an argument inside and out, it's hard to know how to respond to it sometimes. But if you can understand, okay, this is what his premises are, this is what maybe he's committed a fallacy here or there, then it really helps to articulate a response back. And I think this is one of the best descriptions I've ever heard about philosophy, is they say, sometimes it's just teaching you what you already know, but it structures in a way that you can articulate it more coherently. And that's why we sometimes talk about all the basics of arguments and the forms and structures of them, because and that's one thing you will get into philosophy, is you never get away from the fundamentals, the fundamentals are incredibly important to philosophy, and it's good to, and it's really good to have a solid foundation, which we'll talk about a bit more in the shows upcoming. I mean, there's way too much to talk about in one show, but if you understand the fundamentals, it will provide a good basis for learning everything else about it. And I think this is important because I've actually seen people who have philosophy degrees, who are professional philosophers, making mistakes when it comes to fundamentals. You know, even, and it's incredible to see this, but it's kind of like science, where sometimes even a skilled scientist will make mistakes or deliberately either intentionally or unintentionally, and it's important to be able to protect yourself from a scientist who's either just messing up or actually trying to mislead people. And you do that by knowing the fundamentals. You know, if you know the fundamentals of science, how, you know, what a good experiment is supposed to look like, a good report is supposed to look like, you can actually spot errors when somebody is trying to mislead.
Yeah, and what the scientific method is.
Right. Right.
I mean, philosophy really it's ancient, okay, and it really has changed to a certain degree over the years. I mean, Plato was a philosopher who was born in 429 BJ, which I always say before Jesus, and he lived to 347. But back then, there really wasn't the idea of monotheism back then. That really there were a ton of gods. There were gods for absolutely everything, for every day of the week, one that took care of your crops, that you know, a god of thunder,
and actually, I would say one thing that was going on around that time is actually polytheism was on its way to monotheism through a middle step where I think it's called henotheism, where they started introducing the idea of a master deity. Mm-hmm. But there were still all these other deities.
But the thing was that it was still kind of accepted that a place like heaven existed where all these deities sort of mingled.
Right.
So the kind of was a heaven, but the Jehovah wasn't the only tenant.
Right.
There.
Well, actually, and if you think about it, Christianity isn't monotheist, because you have, like, you know, God and his angels, which you could almost, and if you really want to look at, you know, at stretching definitions a little bit, an angel could be viewed as a deity.
Yes.
You know, they have powers, so they have, you know, some of them have names, they have individual responsibilities. You know, you could look at that and say, well, that's actually just a deity that's been kind of stripped down a little bit.
Yeah. I'm just going to read a little bit here from about forms, according to Plato. Okay. According to Plato's metaphysical theory, there's an aspect of reality beyond the one which we can see. This aspect of reality, the intelligible realm, probably was referring to, you know, like heaven, is comprised of unchanging, eternal, absolute entities which are called forms. These are absolute entities such as goodness, beauty, redness, sourness, and so on, are the cause of all the objects we experienced around us in the visible realm. An apple is red and sweet, for instance, because it participates in the form of redness and in the form of sweetness. A woman is beautiful because she participates in the form of beauty. Only the forms can be objects of knowledge. That is, forms are the only things that we can know about. Okay? Now, among the forms, one stands out as the most important. This is the form of the good. Now, Plato is unable to tell us exactly what the form of good is, but he does tell us that it is the source of intelligibility and our capacity to know. Also, that it is responsible for bringing all of the other forms into existence. He compares its role in the intelligible realm to the role of the sun in the visible realm. The form of good is the ultimate object of knowledge. It is only once one grasps the form of good that one reaches the highest grade of cognitive activity and understanding. Okay? Now, as I was saying, true monotheism as we know it today did not really exist at that time, and there were gods for everything. Now, Aristotle, who was in the same time period, he was born in 384 BC, is the first person in Western history to argue there is a hierarchy to all life in the universe, that because nature never did anything unnecessary, as he observed. So his so-called ladder of life has 11 rungs, at the top of which are humans. Now, the medieval Christian theorist ran with this idea, extrapolating it to the hierarchy of God with man, including angels. Thus, the angelic hierarchy of Catholicism, usually thought as purely a Catholic notion, actually stems from Aristotle, who lived and died long before Jesus was born. Aristotle was, in fact, at the very heart of the classical education system used throughout the medieval Western world. Aristotle had something to say on just about every subject, like me, okay, whether abstract or concrete, and modern philosophy almost always bases every single principle, idea, notion, or discovery on a teaching of Aristotle. His principles of ethics were founded on the concept of doing good rather than merely being good. A person may be kind, merciful, charitable, etc., but until he proves this by helping others, his goodness means precisely nothing in the world, in which case it means nothing to him.
One thing I would add to Aristotle is before Aristotle, philosophers were somewhat unsystematic about how they approached their work.
Yeah.
And Aristotle really was the first one to start formalizing a lot of different techniques and approaches, and how he presented his talks.
Yes, it was what, scholasticism.
Right. And I think it's interesting because if you read philosophy from way back then, most of it I've read has been presented in dialogue form, where it's philosophers discussing an issue rather than arguing for a point.
Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes they go off on numerous tangents. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was like for someone getting started in the Socrates Cafe. You pick a subject and then just run with it, and you just talk and explore everything, and there's so many different avenues that you go down. And
that's kind of the beginning of Plato's Republic. He's talking about justice and the very concept of justice, and how do we define it, and why should we do this? Why is it that we need to do this? And and what actually Plato really contributed to that was that justice is a social concept, and really, as Bertrand Russell noted, he was the one who brought it, who stood at odds with the more individualism that you see in Christianity, where it's not about which is more about what the individuals do in their relationship with God. But Plato was more about, well, what's our contract with each other?
Yeah.
And that's what justice is. And to that degree, it's kind of an interesting way to present it, because it gets you to think about all the different ins and outs of it. Although sometimes it gets a little tedious to read, I will say. Because
Very much so. But
because you almost want to just say, get to the point already. But it is valuable to explore the different options, explore the different avenues. If not just knowing what to think, but why do you think the way you do, and why did they think the way they did?
Between about 1100 and 1500 AD, philosophy as a discipline took place as part of the Catholic Church's teaching system known as scholasticism. Scholastic philosophy took place within an established framework blending Christian theology with Aristotelian teachings. Although the fundamental orthodoxies could not be changed, there were nevertheless deep metaphysical disagreements. William of Ockham is remembered for his principle on ontological parsimony and cutting himself while shaving while thinking about this principle. It is undoubtedly why it is nicknamed Occam's razor. Basically, excuse me, that was bad, that I was stretching. Basically, it says that all considerations being equal, the simplest solution is usually the correct one. And I think we all find that actually in life.
Yeah, that's actually very, it might, that's actually still very profound. It's that whole principle to be formalized is really cuts down on a lot of unnecessary assumptions. It's really it's how we cut out. And he's right. Normally it is the more simple ones, and we shouldn't multiply unnecessary assumptions. And that's one of the bedrocks of philosophy right now.
Yeah.
And it is extremely important to remember it. And sometimes it's been extended too, where we look at probability of something as being true. Now, some people want to say that, well, because everything has a non-zero probability of being true, we should consider all of it. But what we really pick up from Occam's razor is we should only consider the more probable answers. Like, if something is 95% probably true, we shouldn't consider anything that might be 5% probable. Mm-hmm. And I think that might seem like common sense, but this is actually not so much to some people. And we'll actually often run into this in debate, in the debating and engaging with in the tables we do. Is they'll say, well, even if we concede, well, yeah, it's technically there is a non-zero possibility that God exists, but unfortunately they'll come back with, well, that must mean he does exist. No, it doesn't. It just means that, well, we can't say for 100% sure he doesn't. We find no reason to say that he does. And when you introduce a God, like you'll see many of these, the classic arguments for the existence of God, for example, most notably the first cause argument. The adding a God to creating the universe doesn't actually solve any of the philosophical problems it's trying to set out to answer. And you've added a step. You've added another assumption. You've added another assumption to your model of the universe, which is a God. And this is what really Occam's razor is one of the strongest arguments against that is we're multiplying assumptions here that don't get us any closer to an answer. Mm-hmm. So all things are equal here, so...
God actually complicates things.
Yeah, it does. That's the thing. It really complicates things. We're adding unnecessary assumptions, and for that reason, it's less likely to be true.
Well, the thing is that what makes it more difficult is the fact that you can't really quantify God. There isn't any scientific method you can use to prove the existence of God. So therefore, what you're stuck with are people's opinions, their notions of what God is, and they attribute to their God what makes them comfortable, like that, which just complicates things all to heck.
And it's usually, as Dan Barker once put it, there's really no coherent definition of a God. And one thing you also get is many of the elements of these religions are completely ad hoc. That means that they've gone back and they've changed a lot of their assumptions. And what makes an ad hoc rationalization a fallacy is the fact that it's unsubstantiated. Like you could make a, for example, you get this a lot in creationism where they're like, well, maybe the what do I want to say, the molecular clocks can reset somehow, the way we do these dating methods. Well, that's requiring an ad hoc, unsubstantiated assumption that's multiplying complexity, because there's no evidence that that's the case, but there's evidence that nuclear decay is constant. So that's what we mean when we go back and we change things in an ad hoc manner, is what really goes against Occam's razor and what makes us multiply assumptions. And one thing I've also heard is a good application of this is when you talk about conspiracy theories, and they go, and he said, never. There's the saying goes something like, never assume malice for something that can be explained through stupidity.
Oh God, that really is profound.
I mean, stupidity is a much simpler example, a much simpler answer. They weren't planning against it. They didn't just let it happen. They didn't, go through all these complicated plans to do something. They probably were just stupid and messed up. I mean, that's a much simpler answer to many of these conspiracy theories.
Okay, just to see if you think that this is logical or nothing, we say that nothing is better than God. Having a lobster is better than having nothing. Lobsters, therefore, are better than God. To me, yes, lobsters are better than God, like that. But you can see, you can make all kinds of arguments depending upon how valid that you want to make it.
But there's always the point, you have to demonstrate the premises in order to. In order for it to be a sound argument, rather. But
okay, it looks like our time is winding down here. Have you got anything more that you want to talk about?
Just as a reminder, our next show won't be until October 14th. I'll probably be talking about epistemology in our philosophy discussion, which is really just methods. It's like scientific method, historical methods. Well, that is methods deployed by historians in order to try to figure out what happened in the past. And we already discussed Occam's razor, which is actually a very, very powerful method. And that will be our next show. And so I hope to see you all next time.
Yeah, and thanks for tuning in, and you can pick up this program on YouTube, where we will also have it rebroadcast.